Welcome back to Techtonic 2.0, Australia's National AI Summit. This is breakout session number 4, which is all about using AI to deliver for citizens. So we're exploring all of the opportunities that are available for AI technologies to benefit individuals and communities. We're looking at the barriers that would prevent adoption of AI in Australia. We're looking at the actions that Australian government and businesses and communities can take. And looking at this comprehensively, it's not a minor issue. This is not just some sort of frosting on the top, because we have to understand that AI is becoming synonymous with our daily lives, right? It is helping us search the web. Google's got some of the most sophisticated AI capacity in the world. It's improving our health and our well-being. You know, I wear a smartwatch, and this smartwatch is now increasingly connected to all sorts of systems that can detect whether I have a heart arrhythmia or what my temperature is and whether I may be catching COVID. It's making our homes safer. It's making our cities safer. The clever use of AI is actually helping us confront national challenges. So you have the CSIRO and the National Council for Emergency Services developing Spark. That's that AI-powered bushfire modeling and prediction tool, which is being used to help save lives during the darkest days Australia's experienced. You have in Kakadu, you have the Indigenous owners and rangers, the CSIRO, you have Microsoft Australia, you have University of Western Australia and Parks Australia and Charles Darwin. They are all collaborating to provide, to mix AI and Indigenous knowledge to solve complex environmental challenges. And so there are clearly enormous opportunities here to help us deliver better services, to realize benefits for communities, for citizens, for regions, for addressing the grand challenges that we have as a nation, and there are no shortage of those. But there are big questions here. Is it going to be safe? Is it going to be equitable? Does it make the world a better place? When it comes to AI, do we know what good looks like? And we have a stellar group of panelists here to help us answer that question today. I will introduce them one at a time, and I'll ask them to share from their own experience and their own vision how AI affords benefits to individuals and to communities. And so let's start with Dr. John Flackett. John is head and co-founder of the Artificial Intelligence Laboratory, AI Lab. John, share with us some of your experiences where AI has been delivering benefits for individuals and for communities.
Thanks, Mark. It's really great to be with you and my fellow panelists today. Obviously, I'm joining you remotely, so I'd first like to acknowledge that the land that I'm on today in Adelaide is the traditional lands of the Kaurna people. I'm fortunate to live on their country, and it's an honour to be here. Look, you mentioned it in your introduction, actually. AI is based on systems that are already deeply embedded into most people's lives. When we're shopping online, AI powers suitable recommendations for other products, forcing us to buy stuff that we do want, really, don't we? Most of our inboxes, email inboxes are pretty much spam-free nowadays because an AI algorithm has automatically detected junk mail. We navigate easily between places with incredibly precise AI route planning on online maps. We talk to our phones in natural language, and we even get it to perform searches or play music for us, which, by the way, learns our preferences, so it can recommend other music, alternative tunes that we may not have heard before. Like you said, there's my watch, there's my smartwatch that's monitoring our health. Doesn't so much monitor my health as just nag me to get up and do stuff when I've been sat down for too long. And in the wider community, artificial intelligence is being used to monitor traffic control flows in cities by adjusting traffic lights. And that's not only to reduce queues, but also to stop the buildup of dangerous levels of carbon monoxide. Critical infrastructure, such as electricity grids and wind turbines, are being monitored in real time by AI-based systems that can identify faults and either shut down the equipment before it fails completely, or the system automatically calls out a maintenance team. We've got drones equipped with cutting-edge image processing that's being used to recognize flooded or unstable roads after storms, or even keep track of endangered species to help protect them. And artificial vision systems are even being used by local councils to identify potholes in roads and invasive weeds in verges. And I guess my point is, with all of these examples, is that AI doesn't sit within certain industry verticals, but rather it's a technology that cuts right across all sectors. And because of this, there's huge opportunities for countries that embrace AI and invest in developing homegrown capabilities to design and develop AI-powered solutions for all the citizens.
So then are we saying that AI is something more like electricity, where you don't talk about electricity being a benefit, but it's really all of the ways that people use electricity?
Yeah, sure. It's hidden, right? We don't think about it, and it's becoming more and more like that now. It just powers our lives.
All right, now we'll turn to Dr. Anand Rao. Anand is a partner in PwC's advisory practice. He is the global artificial intelligence lead and innovation lead in PwC's emerging technology practice. So Anand, you've no doubt seen numerous organizations implement AI technologies to provide better services to consumers, to citizens. How commonplace do you think AI will be in the day-to-day lives of all of us in the next 5 to 10 years?
Thanks, Mark. I mean, great to be here with you and the other remaining panelists here. It's a very tricky question, all right? So I've been in AI for 35 years, and asking what will happen in 5 years and 10 years and predicting it with a crystal ball, maybe the AI can do better, but as humans, we have always failed in our prediction. So with that, I'll still answer your question. I've been a big believer, I would say, in systems thinking and also scenario planning. So I'll answer you by essentially taking maybe two scenarios, right? So two extreme scenarios, one a utopian scenario and other a more dystopic scenario. I know so far we haven't really talked about any of the negatives of AI, but maybe I'm the first one to start that. But let's start with the more positive view, right? So we just heard John mention about AI being in every industry sector. So AI is known for, it's a general purpose technology, as we call it. So it permeates every industry, whether it's manufacturing, high tech, financial services, agriculture, mining, all of those, and every functional area as well, whether it's marketing, operations, finance, risk, so you name it, and AI is embedded already, and all the companies are using it, countries are using it. So if you just project forward maybe a 5-year, 10-year span, I think AI will be even more embedded. I mean, you gave some great examples as well, right? So we have been using AI for a long time in our email systems, in our search systems. So that's going to continue, if anything, more. So we look at AI very much as sensing, thinking, and acting. If you look at all three departments here, AI is going to get better and better at sensing. So we already are attaching with sensors. We talked, I think, in the manufacturing panel about IoT, the sensors, so, and the industrial IoT. That's essentially going to enable all kinds of interactions, so conversational interfaces, gesture-based interfaces, so natural language processing, real-time translation. All of those things are going to come from a sensing perspective. Now, if you go to the next area in terms of thinking, again, the thinking that's being done by AI so far has been largely about automating tasks, maybe a little bit about making decisions. But I think that's going to get better and better, better reasoning, making better decisions. So we talked a lot, I think, in the previous sessions about augmenting human decision making. There are some things that humans do very well, some things that AI does very well, right? So lots and lots of data, and then trying to synthesize from that, they do very well. We can apply it, right? So in that sense, there's going to be a lot more in the thinking space that AI is going to be doing. And finally, acting, right? So acting in terms of either physical or digital, right? So again, whether it's robotics, drones, autonomous vehicles, autonomous flying vehicles, or in the software sense, right? So automatically sending out emails and scheduling our trips and so on. So there are all the great things that are very likely to happen. AI essentially going to be embedded and ubiquitous. Now, let's get a little bit to the dark side, the dystopic view, right? So all of the things that I just mentioned would obviously lead to better society, so abundance in terms of what is available, more spare time for people. All of those are there in the utopian scenario. But again, one of the reasons why we talk about responsible AI and inclusive AI is because of some of the risks, right? So we see a continued escalation, as we are all very aware, about cyber wars powered by AI now, right? So it's ransomware, again, being very targeted, using AI as to who we go after, how we go after all the bad actors. Again, it could be a variety of bad actors. Big disasters are triggered by just faulty AI or even malevolent operations of AI. So the list goes on, and the information is getting very personalized, tailored by AI. And that's also leading to one notion of truth or fact. It's my version of truth versus your version of truth. So I can go on, but I think that's also impacting how corporations are behaving. I mean, corporations are holding personalized data, and they could be manipulating customer behavior. So if you look at the other side of it, yes, it could be very beneficial, but we are all being led by maybe authoritative governments, or it could be companies owning the data and pushing us, or what they call as nudging us into what they want us to do, as opposed to what you and I really want to do. So I think it's all leading to maybe a potential scenario of widening wealth gap, education gap, health gap, all of those things. It's a sort of the more dystopic view. I think the reason why we're all talking here about some of these is to prevent them, right? So that we can land in a good place in the utopian world and not really dismiss this sort of dystopic view.
And you set things up perfectly for our final panelist, Rachel Howard. Rachel is the Impact Technology Director for the Frontier Technology Initiative at Minderoo Foundation. So Rachel, the Frontier Technology Initiative is building a digital ecology that empowers people. And I love it when we use that word. How do you see AI empowering people today and in our future?
Thank you, Mark, for your question. And it's great to be here with my fellow panelists, John and Anand, for this really important discussion on AI for citizens. Frontier Tech is an initiative of the Minderoo Foundation, and as a philanthropic foundation, we exist to arrest unfairness and create opportunities to better the world. And that's a really, inspiring and challenging mission. For Frontier Tech, trying to apply that in the technology space, and if we particularly think about the context of AI, this major instrument for change for us, and what you might say is the raw material of the internet. Trying to think about how we arrest unfairness and create opportunities is, is a really big concept and question. We're going through an industrial revolution, but unlike the steam engine revolution, AI, the difference is that it can make decisions about people's lives and livelihoods. So I think AI that empowers people in its best possible version upholds things that people value in their lives and livelihoods. And the way that we think about that is, things that we often take for granted: physical and mental safety. It's like freedom from coercion, persecution, freedom to participate in the democratic process, high levels of privacy, equal opportunity to have a say, get access to a job, get access to quality healthcare or education, and even having social equality and being free from discrimination. So they're things we take for granted in our society today, but what we need to remember is that it's not a given that those things translate when we build, our emerging technology. So a couple of big trends, having a think about what I think big themes around AI that empowers people. There's three that I'll share today. I think a lot of people are thinking about healthy social spaces online. this is the translation of the physical, the conduct and the values we hold in our physical spaces, like our schools and our libraries and our workplaces and our play spaces. That sort of conduct and those values are translated into our digital spaces. We don't want to see racism and misogyny. We don't want to see bullying or misinformation in our digital spaces. And so the things I see people working on is how to have humanizing language and how to cultivate belonging and how to have reliable information, how to build strong local ties and reverse polarization. So that's one big theme. Second big theme I see is around inclusive growth. And I think this is a real mega trend post-pandemic as we digitize, rebound the economies. I see a lot of investment in advances towards equal economic opportunity, and that is things like access to financial services, quality education and training, investment in human capital, and in tech, diversity and inclusion, and building the AI, because we know diversity and inclusion in the design and build builds better products. The third one that I'll leave you with is around something people are calling the new care economy. I think this is another macro trend. I think it's AI that facilitates quality care. This is things to support aging in place. We think that senior caregiving is a $180 billion industry globally. There's solutions around training for carers, nurses. We see technologies around, ed tech for school attendance, homeschooling, disabilities therapy. We see things that support working families, and we see talent, diversity and inclusion, de-biasing solutions out there. So these are themes I think are post-COVID, rebounding our economic, our economies to make sure that there's high access, there's quality caregiving and high inclusion. I think they're big topics.
Okay, so it sounds like from the three of you, there are really enormous opportunities for AI to deliver tangible benefits for Australians. But we've got to be clear here, realizing the AI future is going to require equity. It's going to require that all Australians are going to be able to participate in and realize those benefits. This isn't just a revolution for some. But to do that, Australians are going to need to be able to trust that the technology is going to be used responsibly. It's going to be used safely. It's going to have to promote inclusivity. And public acceptance of AI, sure, it's trending in the right direction, but there are still a significant portion of Australians who are hesitant here around a technology that can present some fairly confronting faces. So I'm going to open this up to the whole panel. Why do you think trust is low in AI in Australia, and what do we risk by not building that trust? Let me begin with you, Rachel.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. A great question. So I can understand why there's some concern and worry. There's a lot of unknowns. It's fairly new territory. And the extent to which AI is impacting our lives is really becoming quite significant. Anand and John, you mentioned loads and loads of use cases. We know that our commercial lives are monetized through hyper-personalization. Our physical spaces are monitored. Our human service interactions are automated. There's predictive systems making decisions about our life that are fairly material, about whether we get loans, whether we get job ads, whether we get public benefits. And our lives are increasingly online. And I think that people don't feel quite in control of that just yet. So if I look at Office of Information Commissioner last year survey around privacy, we see that 2/3 of people don't feel in control of their privacy online, and that 90% want more control and choice about what's collected. And we see the Digital Inclusion Index saying that the digitally included and the digitally excluded is fairly substantial, and it's widening in some areas, particularly the regions. So I think that, as I mentioned, Mark, the AI that empowers people, it delivers on what people value. And I sort of laid a foundation for what I think people value, that participation, that privacy, that agency and control. And I think for industry and government, they can build trust by demonstrating that, by saying, we value what you value. And, we're not going to be opportunistic or extractive. We're not going to wait to be caught out. We're going to be on the front foot of this and really be demonstrating how we're building those trust measures in. And I think absolutely that industry, business and government will be rewarded for that. They would get rewarded through brand equity, customer loyalty, repeat business, and trust in government. And I don't think trust is soft stuff. I think we're talking about hard business value drivers. Intangible assets, including social license to operate, is up to 50% of enterprise value for publicly listed tech. Trust is a global traded commodity. And Anand, I was really interested and inspired to see the pivot towards trust that PwC is making, with a big announcement recently around the business pillar of trust and helping your clients build trust in the market.
So, Anand, this is perfect. You're coming to us from America right now.
Mm-hmm.
How is the landscape there? Because yes, as Rachel just said, PwC put out this big statement, made the big article in the New York Times about how you're really pivoting to be able to help businesses establish trust as one of their core values, because it's seen now as being very important. Are the Americans in this area more or less trusting? How are they working with this?
Yeah, very, very interesting question there, Mark. And I think there are, as Rachel was saying, there are sort of two interrelated issues here. One is people trusting AI, and the other one is, I think, people trusting other people. And what AI is doing is essentially it's surfacing the latter, right? So of course you need to trust the AI and you need to have certain things in place. But if you look at all the debate that's been going on in bias and fairness, to a large extent, it is more centered around people not trusting other people. Again, maybe triggered by AI and other technology, but that's sort of going on. So with that, your question was very much, how is it in US? Now, just I would say the notion of trust in institutions in US is much lower than in Australia. Again, having spent more than a decade in Australia and a decade or more in US, I can see that as well, right? So just the trust in institutions, trust in employers, and a recent trust index essentially shows, especially during the pandemic, the trust that people have in their employers actually went up in Australia by 3 percentage points, whereas in US it went down by 2%. I was surprised actually in UK, it went down by 6% in UK, right? So substantial drop there. And if you look at the trend in US here, the trust index has been dropping, and over the past 7 years, it has actually dropped 14 points from 62 to 48. So there's a diminishing level of trust. So, and I think it's reaching that sort of crisis proportion, if you like. And this loss of trust is not just in businesses, right? So it sort of transcends business to government bodies, institutions, so anything that is federal, state, all of that, and also with media sources, right? So people are glued to their own version of the truth, as I said earlier, and media sources are very polarized as well. And the trust in business and political leaders, that's also divided. And in US, I think there's another, a worse situation where there really is a big divide, I think, between sections of the population, and because of that polarization of views. So one of the reporters has called this the mistrust doom loop, and it's become a vicious cycle. People see some, institutional biases, and therefore they don't trust. Rather than building that trust and working together, what we have done is essentially lock ourselves into smaller and smaller groupings. And I love what Rachel was saying in terms of the healthy social places, right? So there are no such social places now where things are fact-driven or truth, right? So that's what is sort of driving this notion of trust actually going down. And I think there is light at the end of the tunnel. I know, I think Rachel spoke briefly about ESG, right? So environmental, social governance. That's something that companies are adopting, countries are adopting, various groups are adopting. And that is, again, looking at getting much more inclusive growth going, getting companies to focus not just on shareholder value, but a much larger stakeholder to be able to talk about sustainability, inclusivity, diversity, inclusion, all of those. And as I think Rachel mentioned, so we as PwC have launched this Trust Institute, essentially looking at how we can educate businesses, how we can bring them in, and how they can change the way they think about society at large, in addition to their customers, and build that trust. I think that's really critical. And I agree, it's a very much a mega trend as we move forward. And I think everything depends on that trust between people, as well as trust in the technology like AI.
So, John, in order, I guess, either stop this doom loop or to get us out of it, we've heard a lot about the role of increasing awareness and understanding. And we saw that there was a lot of that in the consultations for the AI action plan, that it was an idea to engage as a way to do that. So how do we see awareness fostering trust?
That's a really, really good question, Mark. And I think actually I'm very lucky in my work to help introduce concepts of AI to decision makers. And sometimes when we're doing that, there's apprehension in embracing and adopting AI, because there's been quite a lot of fear mongering, I think, about machines, especially about machines with this super intelligence that's going to decide that humans are no longer required. And there's obvious parallels here with the depiction of killer robots in films, but a much more concrete example is the fear that AI will replace all human jobs, and mentioned that a little bit earlier. I might have this wrong. I think there was a recent study from the University of Queensland that said about 72% of people distrusted AI, and their biggest concern was this AI's perceived effect on employment. However, I want to be upbeat as well, and the reality here, and if we're talking about awareness, the reality is that AI and other emerging technologies are actually generating jobs. So last year, the World Economic Forum published its Future of Jobs report, and that actually estimated a net increase, I think, of 12 million jobs due to AI by 2025. So I think the whole point of awareness about AI and its impact on the world is absolutely critical to trust. So with our clients, as we gradually workshop use cases that are suited to AI solutions and show that really the current AI tools and techniques are actually only really good at a single specific task, something we call narrow AI, people start to realize and get a bit more comfortable actually that not all jobs are at risk. In fact, most cases, smart automation sits alongside the human worker and it frees them up from repetitive tasks. So overall, AI helps automate tasks, supercharges productivity, and it gives humans more time to spend on other areas of their work and personal development. And that in turn leads and enables innovation, new business ideas, opens up a completely new way of dealing with business processes as well.
And are we missing a trick here by telling people, because we heard in the opening panel that there's a lot of examples of how products are built better, they're built more safely, they're built more reliably because there's AI in the loop looking for defects. Are we maybe missing a trick, not communicating that's another way to be able to build trust?
Yeah, definitely. I think that the whole communication around AI is quite tricky for a start. 70 years now, since the term's been coined, and we're still trying to figure out what it means. I hear all the time when people say, an AI or the AI, that doesn't exist. We don't have an AI in that way, right? It's not a thing. It's a field of study. But obviously when it hits the mainstream, we have these new, the words get changed a little bit, and obviously when we're reporting this, when we're reporting and talking about AI, we need new things to talk about, right? So AI is not good enough. We need artificial general intelligence. where computers are as smart as us, but that's not enough either. We need artificial superintelligence, where they're like, you know. But going back to trust, though, around this, I think people are genuinely right to worry about letting algorithms, AI or not. Don't forget that we've been automating and using machines with statistics to predict and make predictions and make decisions for people for a long time, determine outcomes for us. You know, especially in terms of autonomous weapons and using facial recognition for surveillance, for instance. And I think that those kind of things make people lose trust in AI. And in fact, when machines are used to make decisions, but we don't know that they're being used, right? And I can't remember, either Rachel and mentioned this a bit earlier. That transparency is horrible for people, and that's actually something that the Human Rights and Technology report from the Australian Human Rights Commission, that everyone should read that report. It's really, really good, but that actually does talk quite a lot about that transparency of us knowing that decisions are being made by machines.
All right, so that brings up the question of the collective steps and actions that we actually need to create this trusted, secure, responsible AI future. So Anand, are organizations having the right discussions about trusted and responsible AI? And how can they start asking the right questions here when it comes to AI?
Yeah. I would say that organizations are still very much learning. I think John gave some great examples of people not really understanding AI, right? So the whole education awareness. I would say most of the business leaders, not all of them, but most of the business leaders are still learning what exactly is this, what value does it bring, and therefore what the risks are. So what I would say is that, as we all know, AI has been the latest school technology. There's so much of hype around it. And usually it's some executive, some board level even nowadays wanting to do AI, right? So they start off exactly as John said, if we need to do AI, so can we hire someone to do AI? And I think that's a very wrong premise to start with. You don't want to be doing AI. You need to be solving business problems or taking care of whatever strategy you have, increasing customer retention, selling new products. So that's your core business. AI can be used. So the first question I would say that the company should be asking is, do I really need an AI to solve this particular problem, right? So if I don't need, then just don't go there, right? So there are better ways, maybe cheaper ways to solve the problem, solve it, right? So go only to those use AI only where you cannot, right? So that's the first thing. And then I think once you get past that, yes, this is really a problem that can be addressed or better addressed with machine learning, natural language processing, computer vision, again, the areas of AI, right? So again, it's not one blanket AI. Then I think you start looking at the risks of errors. Where is the bias coming from, right? So in its development, in its data, explainability, robustness, safety, security, privacy, transparency, accountability. There's a whole dozen or more things that people need to worry about. And that's when it starts happening. Now, when we have looked at organizations, there are no more than, in our surveys, it varies by geography, right? So some countries are more advanced than others. Roughly only around 20% of the large companies are essentially deploying AI, i.e. machine learning models, natural language processing models at scale at an enterprise level. Only 20% of them are so really doing it. For them, this has become a concern and they are addressing it. They just started addressing it because now it is very much used at scale with their customers. And if something goes wrong, it is a big issue. It's a headline of the newspaper, right? So now they are addressing that. The remaining, whatever 80%, I think 30% are still exploring, roughly 50% are doing proof of concepts. They're just testing out various things. So for them, this is really not such a big deal yet because they are much more worried about, hey, is there really real value here? Is it all hype, or do I get really some value? Let me figure that out and then worry about all the risks that you guys talk about. Now did we just see whether it's valuable to you? So they don't worry about it. But I think that's also a bit dangerous. You can have a good ROI without considering the risk, but as soon as you consider the risk, maybe the ROI goes out the window. So I think you need to be conscious of that as well. I think there are a number of issues here that organizations should be thinking. I think they're getting on that path, but still a long way to go.
So Rachel, the Frontier Technology Initiative is doing a lot to ask for and ensure accountability in the tech ecosystem. And of course, this is a very hot topic, particularly in the United States this week, what with a raft of bills going through Congress and a new FTC commissioner who's very antitrust oriented. And of course, all of this is about protecting the public from harm, right? And of course, we saw what happened earlier this year with Google and Facebook and all of that. Do you think that Australians are informed enough around the benefits and the harms of AI? And what do we need to do to make sure that this is a public, accessible discussion that brings the nation in together to have that discussion?
Thanks, Mark. No, I don't think Australians are informed enough. I think there's a lot of unknowns, actually, for people. And I think right now it ranges from instinct, like when something you talk about shows up in your feed and it feels creepy, to blind trust that your credit scoring data that's used to make a decision about whether or not you get a loan doesn't have errors in it. So I think a really good place to start is actually more transparency for people. I think that will enable people to participate in the discussion in a more informed way. And I think there's sort of 4 big things that you can be transparent about. The first is verification that the product works to spec, and it kind of does the right thing by you. So that's, building trust on entry with plain English terms and conditions, collecting only information that's essential for the service, giving people the ability to object to collection but still access the service, or giving them options to move their data. I think the second thing is validation, that there's no unintended consequences, that you've risk assessed, you've looked at your AI and thought about all the intended and unintended consequences. You've got good oversight on the outcomes of your AI. And I think in this category, it's also saying what accountability or responsibility you're going to take for the displacement consequences. And I see really the leaders in this who are driving automation in their businesses really making serious upskilling efforts to transfer their displaced workforce. And even at a micro scale, that's upskilling for the components of the job that are automated out. I mean, is the transfer to higher value added work, the promise of that, is it happening? It actually takes a lot of effort. And in my consulting days, spent quite a bit of time thinking about that problem, that upskilling problem. I think the third category is security, and people want to see strong protocols that you're preventing malicious attacks. And in particular, where we see a bit of bad press is when people don't have enough accountability and due diligence on the third parties that handle the data. And I would say the fourth area is around human control, that people want to see that there's an accountable person for an AI system. So I think that organisations who are sharing this type of information in the product through explanations and choice are being transparent with people, and that is really informative, and it helps build literacy for people. And I think they can do it through feedback, and I think they can do it through reporting and insights on how their oversight is going. I think in the public sector, there's quite a lot of transparency mechanisms that we've used, for all kinds of things. There's registers for government data sharing, for example, that just gives people transparency and allows them to be informed. I think there's the raw ingredients of getting public debate and participation in the debate is things around, how do you drive people to participate? How do you give them access to authority? How do you elevate shared concerns? How do you build bridges between groups? And some practical things that I see in inspiring ways of this is things like leaders having hashtag campaigns, just asking people, hashtag ask the mayor. You see participatory budget processes. You see things like the Responsive City Project uses data smart governance to preempt problems. You see SMS polling. You see local journalism doing neighbourhood story sharing and experience sharing. So there's lots of offline and online ways to encourage that participation and debate.
All right, and on that topic, because in about 10 minutes, we're going to take questions from all of you on this session. So keep in mind, you can ask those questions on the right side of the window. There's a Q&A tab. You can pop your questions in there. Oh, they've sent some along now, which is good. Thank you. That's timely. So you guys have actually been participating if you're on the channel. Thank you very much. We will get to your questions in a moment. I have a question for John. Now, John, you founded AI Lab to assist organizations in navigating the AI landscape and building awareness. You've talked about your process. What experiences have you had with organizations that are new to the domain? How, I mean, are they like Anand says, are they like, oh, let's order an AI. We need an AI. We need to get the AI in here, figure out. Then we can ask it what it can do.
They bring their AI with them in a box. So, and then how do we use this? No. Yeah. Look, the AI Lab was born out of this need, I think, for a greater awareness about what it really was and what the capabilities really are. We've been very lucky to be able to educate thousands of people around the globe actually about learning about AI. And doing research into AI and providing masterclasses to industry and government really focuses them on being able to approach vendors in the right way as well, to ask the right questions. If you think about the way that people run their businesses, they do that with technology. It wasn't that long ago that industry couldn't even ask the right questions about which server to buy, and they would rely on third-party providers. They quickly learned that they needed to know at least a minimal amount so that they could have good conversations with them and strike good deals. And I think that's probably where we are with AI as well. So that's a big part of what we do. And I think many organizations that we've met, they've really been led to believe that the application of AI is actually smart end-to-end of automation of complete processes, right? Using tools and techniques. Either that or AI is just for research labs or big tech companies. So in other words, employing AI is really, really hard to do and they can't do it. Whereas the reality is the AI tools and techniques are actually surprisingly accessible now. And I think this was really interesting because in the first session for AI manufacturing, this was picked up as well. And this is something that we say to our clients as well, is that you need to kick goals early on in your AI journey. It's really important to do that because that leads to other successes. And so we advise organizations that are looking to get started with AI that they should start really small and focused and pick some of that low hanging fruit because there is an awful lot of that. And so that in other words, look for time consuming repetitive tasks that demand some level of human decision making. And like I said, that was mentioned previously as well. So I think, for a concrete example, we've worked with, say, councils that have wanted to start their AI journey, and they started really small by developing simple, like machine learning chatbot to help citizens know when to put the bin out. And more importantly, what color that bin is they need to put out, right? Because we all struggle with that. Yeah. And like, although that sounds really simple, you still have to build a knowledge base. You still have to work with new technologies and new design methodologies. You have to decide what voice the chatbot's going to have and when to hand off when there's no knowledge or the chatbot doesn't understand the question that it's given. And then once you have that general framework, you can build to progressively enhance the system. So you are scoring goals quite early on. And I think what's really interesting here is that even those seemingly straightforward toy prototype problems that Nan mentioned as well, like a chatbot, right? It requires good data management, because it's at that point you find out that the data you need is actually siloed across all different departments, or it's not in computer readable form. So you have to do all this extra work. So whatever happens, it's a great learning experience. And at the very least, it leads to really good discussions about data governance. And to be honest, at the moment, that's the foundation for building good AI systems.
And it feeds into one of the operating principles that we've learned, which is that the future often begins as an expensive toy. All right. Final question for all of you. If you can give me sort of a minute's answer on all of this. What, in your own opinion, is the number one action needed to ensure that all Australians can benefit from AI? I'll come back to you, John, to start off.
Okay, well, I'm going to stick with education. I think we're still in a massive education piece, whether that's formal education or self-directed. We need to gain, collectively, we need to gain a good common understanding about AI. I'm actually very happy that all of us are nodding at the right places, all at the same time. So that's a really good start. But I think, for the wider community, for citizens, there's so many good resources on there, out there at the moment. Just Google what is AI for a start. You might even find some free AI lab resources up there as well. The other really good source of information is community groups around the country. There's lots of AI startup groups. We run one in South Australia as well. We build AI awareness by showcasing use cases and getting businesses to show applied AI. And I think that once we get that understanding, we can have a better collective conversation. I will just go very quickly back to what was said, though. I think it's really, really important to remember that not everybody has access to the technology that we do, right? There's still many in Australia and across the world that don't have smartphones. They don't have access to the internet. They can't just Google what is AI or travel to the nearest meetup group, for instance. So we've got to double our focus, I think, on reaching those people to make sure they've got the same opportunities to embrace AI.
All right, Rachel, what's your number one?
I'm going to keep brief and just repeat a theme that I think has been powerful today, and it's been a weaving thread through this conversation, which is trust building measures. I think that's good for citizens, and I think it's good for business.
And of course, a good trust building measure is something that happens over time. That trust is a product of continuous, repeated interactions with institutions, with individuals, with artificial intelligence. All right, Anand, what about you?
Yeah, I would agree with both my panelists, education and trust building. Especially on the trust building, I would say government can set the bar in terms of how other companies should behave, facilitate the coming together of different communities, the public-private partnership in what I think people are calling living labs, and then also provide the right guardrails, right? So, and again, in terms of the guardrails, I would say some of the discussion that we had and what the minister announced in terms of bringing research very much with industry, right? So academic research and industry together to solve problems that are facing the community, I think is something very, very apt for AI to get into.
All right. So here's the first question for the audience. I like this one because it's going to turn everything we've been saying on our heads. Is trust, and by the way, the word trust is in scare quotes here, is trust the right framing? If people trust AI because they don't understand the risks, is that the right outcome? Should we be working towards systems instead that are trustworthy or deserve trust? And both of those are in quotes. And this, I like the way it's reframed that. Who wants to take a whack at that one?
I can take a whack at this. So, I mean, when we coined the word responsible AI, and there was a lot of debate at that point, this is 5 years back, that we should call it trusted AI. And my primary objection to it is trust is not something that you name and therefore it is trusted, something that needs to be earned, right? So what companies can do, what governments can do is be very responsible, and that trust is something that you earn by the people, right? So if it is really what it's meant to be with all the other attributes, then customers or the users will, quote unquote, label it as trustworthy, right? So you can't label it and you can't define and say, here are the 10 things, and if you did this, you are trustworthy. No, I think that needs to be earned, and maybe there's 11th criteria that people will come up with. So I agree with whoever had that question, that it's not trustworthy. I think we should be looking at all the other attributes that will lead to the trust.
Rachel or John, anything to add to that?
I think good summary, Anand. Also, I have a bit of trouble with trustworthy AI. In some senses, it's like, does it perform, does it do what you told it to do?
Right.
And it could be trustworthy in that sense, but it could be performing a function that's, not a healthy function, not a good function. So I too use responsible AI, where we, quite a lot, and think that that's a better framing. And I really like your framing of you've got to earn the trust. Where we're constantly reminded, I mean, as a philanthropic organisation standing up for human rights, I mean, we do this in far more areas than just tech, but when you use responsible AI, personally, I don't want to forget that underpinning, anything we do in society is a legal system, and that we have to remind ourselves there's a legal angle to AI, and it's not just intending to do the right thing. It has to meet the legal frameworks and that we have in place, and including, as John mentioned, our human rights laws, which is all about discrimination and removing discrimination and giving everyone the equal chance regardless of gender, race, religion. And so I don't want us to forget that there is an obligation to meet those the frameworks that we already have in place, and it's not just at the choice and discretion of the designer, the builder, and the owners of the systems.
Anything to add, John?
I'm not sure I can. Not sure I can better those two.
All right. This is another, I think, really good question. It's getting to one of the hard issues here. There are a lot of challenges very clearly regarding fairness. And I mean, you can take a look at the troubles that Google has had in its senior AI team around this now, right? And if anyone who's watching this doesn't know, just Google AI firings, you'll see the whole story. So there's challenges regarding fairness, trust, biases for business, biases that are built into citizen services. Do you find these as blockers for the adoption of AI in policymaking? In other words, are we so afraid that we're going to build in these biases that we won't use AI? And if so, then what can we do to overcome those challenges?
I can start with that one. We think a lot about this, but and have done quite a bit of research around government use of AI. I think that particularly in government services, you can be quite fearful about getting it wrong. There's a big downside, and I'm sure private sector feels like that too. So, is there a risk it's going to deteriorate our ROI here? What's at stake? Is it all too hard? What I think is that unless you're intentional about looking for your risks and what are your intended and unintended consequences of the systems that you put out there, then you're going to have a lot of blind spots. And so I think what can be done, I think people who look at this can see, we had the Human Rights Commissioner report, and including the Techtonic report, and he is certainly saying after 3 years of work, there's a big risk that there's discrimination in our AI. And it's usually indirect discrimination where you've removed the protected variables like gender and race, but the system finds other ways to infer them.
Yes.
Exactly.
And so what I think can be done about it is being intentional about looking for the risk. And beyond being intentional, like having standards in the industry is better than it being at the discretion and choice and skill and will of the teams involved and the individuals. I mean, it's sometimes these decisions about how to structure the model to avoid these pitfalls of discrimination. It's very kind of deep levels of the organization. It's those decisions and the oversight of that is not elevated to senior levels, certainly not the board. And so I think putting more standards, so there's kind of clear practice guidelines around how to assess risk, discrimination risk and other risks in your AI systems, and then having very good models of oversight. And that's the oversight of the outcomes. What outcomes did it actually produce? Did the systems actually produce against those variables that we consider protected?
Yeah, I would say, Mark, the word fairness is very, very much like AI, very misused word, right? So when we say fairness, we mean very different things. And in fact, it's well documented that there are more than 30 plus mathematical definitions of fairness. So when we see the headlines, AI is unfair, right? So unfair according to what? Which definition? So my definition of fairness, it's very much agrees to my definition, but may not agree to your definition of fairness. And it can mathematically be shown that there can be no algorithm that is fair across all of those 30 plus definitions, right? So I think we are taking something which is very much at a human level issue, right? So we don't agree on what fairness means, or we interpret it in different ways in different circumstances, right? So it's very circumstantial as well, right? So it's not one thing. So again, I think we are making the same mistake like in AI, that we are using a word that's in common parlance and then taking it to AI and then say AI is biased. No, we don't agree as people which definition to use. Let's sit down and work it out and convey that this is what we mean and this is what the algorithm is doing, right? So that needs to be done. I fully agree with Rachel. That needs to be done with not just the data scientist, but with the business sponsors, with the community, with the legal, with the ethics people, right? So much more broader group of people to look at what is the right thing to do there, right? So then I think some of these things disappear. And also, I know there is also always a higher bar for AI, right? So compared to people, and that's a well-known, again, I think we should use some of these things and refine it as opposed to not use them at all.
John, we have about 30 seconds.
Well, very quickly, I mean, I think we actually have a long history of looking at risk and with automated or algorithmic systems. So, in the 90s, I mean, I know a couple of people that have been doing automated credit scoring, for instance, for decades. And they, they have a massive focus on bias and risk. And, maybe it's time to, dip into a bit of history as well. There is a wealth of knowledge out there. And so this issue of collaboration is absolutely key now.
Right. And it reminds us that some of the new problems we think we have with AI are in fact very old problems. Huge thanks to John Flackett, to Anand Rao, to Rachel Howard. Thank you so much for your wonderful contributions on this panel. Now, everyone, we're going to take another 15-minute break. We will be back at 4 o'clock. Remember that you're changing live streams again, so you have to go tap on that live stream panel as soon as this stream ends, which is going to be momentarily. We will see you back for the closing session at 4 p.m. Thank you very much.